2 years now. When we came on our mission here to Utah to work with family history, I didn't expect to do any family histories in the Carter family. I really thought I was going to do some research on my other sides of the family. And as it turned out, the first thing they did is enmesh us in our mission with the need to write life stories. And I really caught the bug, I guess, for writing life stories, and John was one of them. I've always kind of liked the underdogs in the family, and if there's an underdog in the Carter family, it's John. He's always been the guy that, well, he was the father, but we really don't care about him. We're going to write our life stories about Hannah because she's important. Well, you know, we wouldn't be here without John. We got to face that. Every one of us is a descendant of John if we're part of the Carter family. Of course, the in-laws that are here, you guys don't count, but we know that. You know, same basic thing. So, we thought we knew a lot about John. We have a lot of traditions and things like that. And what I've tried to do is document everything. I have a 43 or 45-page life story of his that I put together that's in the church history library now. I also have them on CDs. I'll see you later if you're interested. And I've actually written 6 life stories so far in the last 2 years. 3 of them pertain directly to the Carters. I've done, since I go through William Pillsbury, his second wife, Hannah Cordelia Meekum. A lot of people don't even think she existed. I've written a life story on her. He was only married to her 3 months and she died tragically in winter quarters. And then I took his oldest son, Philip Libby Carter, who didn't die. He left the church and moved to California, moved out here where we were, or we are, used to be, or are, I don't know what we are anymore. But anyway, I followed his life down and did a life story on him. So anyway, John, what do we know, what don't we know? There's been traditions in the family that he was married multiple times, that he was with the Kirtland Company, and lived in Kirtland and went with the Mormons across the plains, and all kinds of things. That after Hannah left, he married somebody later, and these are the stories that keep popping up. If you go out on Ancestry, you find that he's listed in Maine in 1850 on the census. A lot of people have been pulling that up. That John, by the way, happens to be a cousin of ours, a distant cousin. I'm not exactly sure how. There's a couple of questions. But I do know his parentage, but it's not our John, it's another John.
The latest is on Ancestry.com. Somebody's put up the document claiming it's him in Kirtland.
Oh yeah, and then he was kicked out of Kirtland in 1846 or something like that. Well, that had to be another John too. Okay, so what do we know? John was born in 1782 in Scarsboro, Maine, in a farming family. The Carters had been there for a couple, 3 generations. They were a farming family. How many of you have been to Maine? Any of you been to Maine? There's one word that describes Maine: trees. Okay? If you want to do anything, you've got to figure out how to get the trees out of there. It's not like there's thousands of acres of open land. You want to farm, you're going to have to tear the trees down and make a farm. So there's only limited land. And as the area in Scarsboro grew and grew, that amount of land versus the number of people became a real issue. Somewhere along the way, John, when he was young, ended up going to Portland. There was a story that he was a mariner or a sea captain, and that's absolutely true. I found the deed that shows that in 1804 that he bought a home with another guy. 2 single guys bought a home in Portland, Maine. John's listed as John Carter, mariner. So he really was going out to sea. This was a time when mariners, their occupation of being a sea captain was really the thing to do. Merchant marines, the merchant business was just blossoming. People were making a fortune. Portland, Maine was one of the richest places on the eastern seaboard in 1800, from 1800 to 1805. It was just a fantastic time, and John obviously was in there. Now, whether he owned the ship or not, I don't know. The deed says mariner. We're going to have to go back to Maine and spend some time there and see what we can find in the port records.
How many notes do I need to take, or is this going to be on the...
It's all in the life story I've written.
Okay, and is that going to be on...
Everything, well, I think I'm going to post it. I'm going to post it somewhere. Okay. Charles hasn't posted it at Carterville, so I'm going to get it out on Family Tree or something.
Okay.
And I have it on CDs that I'll give out to you guys if you're interested. So, there's a problem though. John's a sea captain or mariner. He's in the merchant business, and there's this little problem starting to brew. This is a little bit before 1812. That year sound familiar? The War of 1812 with the British. In 1806, I believe it was, they had the non-intercourse policy was put into effect by the British, where we couldn't trade with them anymore. 1807, they had an absolute embargo of all of our ships. They started impressing our sailors. In other words, if they caught Americans out on ships, they would grab them and put them on their ships and turn them into soldiers for the British.
And from 1806 to 1812, they impressed 10,000 American sailors into their navy. Overnight,
the city of Portland went bankrupt. Okay? And John's living there. He's got a house. We don't know what he did with the house. I assume he just probably gave it over to the other guy that was living there. And he goes and buys property in Saco, which is the adjoining township to Scarsboro. In fact, his property was on the line. Part of the property was in Saco, part of the property was in Scarsboro, and it was just right down the road from his dad's place. And at the same time, he marries Hannahite Libby in 1806, not 1805. There's people that have moral issues in this family that want everybody to be legal and lawfully born and things like that, and they twist things. Archibald Bennett was a great one at that. Because of his moral issues, he couldn't stand to have Dominicus born or conceived a little out of wedlock, as it was.
6 months.
And so he pushed the date back a year. They were married in 1806. There's just no way around it. We've got the documentation. It shows it as 1806. Okay? And there's no other wife here. I mean, the records of Maine are fairly good. John's not that old. 1806, he'd be 24. We know in 1804, when he was 22, he was single, because he was a single guy buying this house with another single guy. So I really don't think that Anna Shute marriage could have been there. If it was, it had to have been a very short thing, but there's no record of it. So he did marry Hannah. They moved on to this farm. He bought 72 acres of land. When they're enumerated in 1810, it shows him living in Saco, when in fact the land is, like I say, is part in Saco and part in Scarsboro. So it's, you know, half of one, six of the other kind of thing. There, Dominicus was born, Elmira and Hannah were born. John wasn't planning to stay there. I don't know why. Partly, I think, because there wasn't a lot of land, and I think partly because I don't think he liked the British too much. And we're talking about being a few miles, just 10 miles maybe off the coast, or less. And so he no sooner buys this land in Saco than he starts buying land in Newry, which is about 60 miles inland, halfway to Canada, which of course is where the British are, but it's out in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And Newry was just a new town. In 1810, when he hadn't quite moved there yet, even though he had 262 acres of land there, Newry was only 16 years old, and in the census there was a whole 200 people there, total. So I mean, we're talking about backwoods, okay? So John starts selling this land. He's bought the land in 1806. By 1808, he starts selling the land he's living on. He has sold it all before 1810, but he's still living there. He probably rented it or something. Part of it was because Hannah was close to being born, and I don't think he wanted to drag Hannahite Libby Carter out into the backwoods while she was 7 or 8 months pregnant, so he waited until after she was born, because they're still on the census in 1810 down in Newry, even though he owns land, in Scarsboro, even though he owned land in Newry. Okay. So shortly after that, by 1811, he's a tax holder or a taxpayer in Newry. Stays in Newry from 1811 to 1838. He pays taxes all during that time. Newry's an interesting place. The people there had to be self-sufficient. They had to provide everything for themselves. He has like 262 acres of land. He really uses about 5 acres. The rest of it's all woodland and marsh and stuff like that, but He had maybe 4 or 5 pieces of livestock between horses and cattle and pigs that he would have on any one year, and that's what they were taxed on mainly, was the livestock they had. And so there's a record each year from Newry of the things that they had. They didn't have a lot of things. He'd have a horse maybe some years not. Most years he'd have 2 or 3 head of cattle and a couple of pigs. And they, of course, John was not really a farmer. He was a blacksmith. I don't know where he picked that up from. His dad was a farmer. But he did his side work as a blacksmith. And of course, there's always going to be work in those days for blacksmiths. And so he taught his sons to be blacksmiths. But they lived this sort of an existence in Newry, and it was really interesting. I've gone through the Newry town records year by year during this time period, picking up the tax records and what they did. John was well known in that town. He was the constable and tax collector in 1822, 23, 30, and 38. Now, 38 is an important one because it makes a whole difference in where people were in the family. He also was the selectman, which would be kind of like a town council. He was a selectman in 1829, 30, 33, and 38. So John was a well-respected person within the community, and I think that may play a part in what happens in 1834 when the gospel comes to Newry, into the Carter family. Because he was well-respected within the family. Maybe he wasn't religiously inclined, I don't know. But he was led to this place, definitely, I think, by the British. So then there was a destiny there that they would be in Newry at that time period. And so in 1834, the story was given by Eliza, written half a century later, about the conversion of her mother. The one thing that's my question has always been, now, the stories I've heard is Dominicus is baptized in June of 1834. Hannah's not baptized till July 4th. I kind of think maybe Dominicus sent the missionaries over to his mom when he heard she was so sick. That's my thought. But there's no proof. Nobody's got any proof on that. It's sad that the only story we've ever heard about John, the only words he ever spoke that were recorded are, well, it beats doctor bills, when Hannah was cured. I've done the work on where their property was in Newry. When it says that she was cured by the missionary, she had her hands laid on her and she was cured. She got up and walked a half mile to the creek. That's exactly correct. From where their property was to the Bear River is exactly a half mile. And so I really do believe the story is a true story. Whether John ever really said that or not, I don't know. Yep, she said it, so it probably happened. Okay. Now, what happens after that is where I think a lot of confusion has occurred. The kids that joined the church left Maine in 1836. One of our cousins, Carol York, has just written her master's thesis on the Maine saints, and has documented this very well with all the meetings when Brigham Young came to Newry area, and when the other people came in there and preached the gathering and said for the people that had joined the church to leave and go to Kirtland. 1836, the children who had joined the church left and went to Kirtland, married and unmarried. So Dominicus left, William left by 1837, and they're out of town. What was left in Newry were the children who hadn't joined the church, and John and Hannah. There's the record of the Kirtland Company that says that John went with the Kirtland Company to Missouri. The company the party that had John consisted of 2 people. That can't be our John.
John and Elizabeth.
It's John and Elizabeth, his son. You're beating me to it. Just let me tell the story. John has him and Hannah. He has Mary Jane, who's not married yet, and Richard, who's not married yet. They're still living in Maine. So that can't be him. It's the son, John Jr., who had moved to Kirtland and got married just prior to the time they left. That's who was in the Kirtland Company. John never lived in Kirtland. And I can prove it, because John was a selectman in 1838. In the spring of 1838, the Mormons left Kirtland and headed for Missouri. And you can read the stories of William and the one ox, and all the adventures these people had and the time they took. They were gone by spring. I don't know which month,
May.
March, May? Okay, by May of 1838, they're out of Kirtland. John is still the selectman in Newry, Maine. John called a meeting on September 10th, I believe it is. No, September 10th, 1838, for the town meetings. Maine was run by town meetings. Everybody in the town got together. It was true democracy. And they met together. John called the meeting. He got paid at that meeting for calling it. He got 10 cents or something like that. I can't remember what it was. But he got some little tidbit. But he picked it up. That means he was there. By the next town meeting on the 25th of September, you get the right date, 25th of October. That was 10th of September. By the 25th of October, he's recorded as having vacated his office. So that meant he had left town. So somewhere between the 10th of September 1838 and the 25th of October 1838, he actually does leave Newry with his family. Okay, by that time, the kids are in Missouri. They've made it out to Missouri. Okay, John makes it there quick. It's interesting. Everywhere John's gone, he's paid cash for stuff. He's got money. I think he made money in the shipping, in the boat business. Because he always had money up front. He paid cash for the land in Scarsboro. He paid cash for the land in Newry. And by the 10th of November, 1838, he's in Missouri, paying cash for land, but not where the Mormons were. The Mormons were in Caldwell County, way out in the west. He's in Monroe County, which is only the second county in from the river. And he buys land in the same township where there's this Dooley family. Should sound familiar. In Monroe County, the Dooleys lived in Jefferson Township. And John happens to buy 100 acres there in November. So between September and November, John made it all the way out to Missouri. So I figure he made fast passage. He probably used boats. He may have used stagecoaches. Who knows? But he didn't do the slow, laborious wagon train type travel because he got there fast. Okay, so he's there. We also know he's there because in 1840, on the 27th of August, 1840, he signs for Mary Jane to get married. That was the first thing that I found to document where he was. Because there's online, they showed the actual marriage certificate. He had to sign because she was underage. She was only 17. And so he had to sign for her. And it was also in Jefferson County. So they stayed in Jefferson County. My take, John didn't want to rush into being around the Mormons. By the time our members got there, our family members got to Missouri, there was already persecutions going strong. John didn't want anything to do with that. So Hannah wanted to be with the family, so John took her as close as he dared where he could stay out of trouble. That's my take. I think that's a fair take. I think that's just a logical way to take the story. So they stayed in Jefferson County. His kids probably went right past him over to Nauvoo and established there first. And John follows fairly close. I think he made, if I'm looking at it from his point of view, not being sarcastic, he made kind of a mistake, this next move, thinking he was going to be able to stay far enough away to stay out of the trouble, and that Morleyville, or Rome, whatever you want to call it, way south of Nauvoo there, would be a safe place to go, because he actually moves there. He buys land from William in 1841. And he's still selling his property in Missouri. He had sold it to a guy. He brought the deed with him. Irony is that Isaac Morley witnessed the fact that the guy finally sent the money to Illinois and witnessed the deed so that John could send the deed back to Missouri to the guy for the land that was back in Missouri. And so he got there to Illinois and lived around the Carters in that basic area. According to Philip Libby's record, I haven't found it in any of the other kids' records, John's home was actually burned during the mobbings in 1845. And so, like I say, he thought he was far enough away, but he didn't go quite far enough. He should have gone down into Adams County somewhere. He might have been safe there. So then we come to the period of 1846. Hannah's leaving. Who knows exactly what the situation is? You know, between them, nobody knows. Nobody will write about it. That seems to be our family tradition. If there's a sticky thing, we're not going to talk about it. And so I can't tell you any more than you know about John and Hannah, other than the fact that Hannah did leave. Again, there's the tradition that maybe he married somebody after she left. There's no records of any marriage. It leaves us with one other documentation other than buying and selling of land. I thought it was interesting. He bought land from William when he came at a pretty good price. When William went to leave, he bought it at about 25 cents on the dollar. He bought it back for about 25 cents on the dollar, the land that the kids were selling to him. But he did give them something. Whereas if they hadn't sold them to him, they probably would have had to walk away and gotten nothing for their land. So he was always kind of a shrewd guy. Anyway, that leaves us basically with a couple of things. One, there is no record of them on the 1850 census. I have dug high and low. I've read through the actual censuses. I've tried searching every way I can think of. There's no record of where he is in 1850. I think he just got missed, unfortunately for us, unless we can find him buried in something somewhere. May 1851, Philip finally shows up. Philip had left Maine somewhere, we're not sure exactly when.
About 1840, Philip.
In about 1840, so he had been in Newry in that area. He left, but he didn't come west. He went down into Massachusetts, and then comes from Massachusetts, and finally gets there about a year before his dad dies. Okay, John dies the 13th of August, 1852. That's 2 weeks prior to the day that William Folsbury was called on his mission to India. Okay, so William wouldn't know that his dad was dead when he left here to go on his mission. And that's why when he gets to Illinois, as he's coming back on his mission, he writes home saying, "Dad's dead." Because he didn't know his dad was dead. I imagine the rest of the family did. From the things we're starting to hear now, there was communication back and forth. He probably was the last person in the family to find out his dad had died. Okay, almost finished. The will. This is the most classic genealogical will in the history of genealogy. Here's John with 9 living kids and a wife, and he writes a will about 3 living kids and no wife, and eliminates the entire Mormon population of the family. But it's even better than that. He has 3 kids named, his 3 that hadn't joined the church. He gives Philip $5. He gives Hannah $5. He gives Mary Jane everything else. But he doesn't really give it to her. If you read the will, he gives it to her, but she has to turn it all over to her 5-year-old son, John Dooley, when she dies. She doesn't even have control of it. She can't sell the property. She has to give it to, I guess, was his favorite grandson? I don't know. She had 3 or 4 kids at that point. This one was just 5 years old. And he basically sets her up so that she has to give everything he gives to her to him. Now, what's going on, I don't know. I have no idea, but it's one of the most interesting things in the world, to kind of try to analyze what's going on in the family. And then, of course, there's where's he buried. The family says Fletcher. There's no records in Fletcher. There's no stone in Fletcher. We have found 4 years ago, the Philip Libby Cemetery up on Carter Hill. And to me, that's a more likely place. But I don't know. Even Joe Conover says he's buried in Fletcher. So I don't know. That's an irony. We don't know where he's buried, but we know when he dies. We know where Hannah's buried, but we don't know when she died. So hey, you got 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Try to solve these things. It would be nice to know answers to these questions. Anyway, that's John's life. I hope he's become a little bit more of a person to you, because for me, he never was a person. He was just a name on a pedigree chart. This is what I put in the last paragraph, because it quotes Dominicus in my life story of him. Dominicus's biography mentions this: "Let's be kind in judgment of those who stayed in Illinois. John Carter was at the time nearly 64 years